Hello everyone, I'm Cadet Rogers, and I'm here to tell you about Desmond Doss, aka the Wonder Man of Okinawa. Let's begin. So, starting from the very beginning, in Desmond Doss's very early life, he was born into a working class household in Lynchburg, Virginia, 1919. His father was a World War I veteran who now worked as a carpenter, and his mother worked in a shoe factory full time and also served as a housekeeper. His mother was a very dedicated Seventh-day Adventist, as her parents and grandparents had been before her. So she wanted to raise her children to also be a Seventh-day Adventist. Doss, who was very close to his mother, of course, um, more than happily took up this religion. So the key ideas of Seventh-day Adventism is you rest on the seventh day, which is Saturday. You abstain from all violence, and you abide by a strict vegetarian diet. So Doss did all this his very young life. So unfortunately, um, Doss was a teenager about the time of the Great Depression. So he was only able to attend school up into the eighth grade, where he had to drop out to get a job at a local lumber mill to support his family. So despite these unfortunate circumstances, Doss was still a very kind, very caring person. So one particular story about his kindness is that he was at home with his family listening to the radio one night. He heard a story about an accident that had taken place on a local interstate. A lot of people had been hurt. A lot of blood had been lost. Hospital needed blood. Very very rural community too. So he walked the 6 miles to the local medical clinic, gave his blood, walked another 6 miles back home. The very next day, they needed even more blood. He did the same thing all over again. He didn't have to. He didn't get paid. He didn't get anything out of it. He just did it because it was the right thing to do. Moving on to Doss's early military career. So at the start of World War II, Doss didn't have to join because he worked as a jointer in a shipyard where you put rivets and pieces of metal, bind them together, and make a ship. Ships are very important during World War II, obviously, because it was a key part of fighting Japan. You needed ships to cross the ocean to attack the islands. So it was classified as essential work. Doss didn't have to join. But after a while, he couldn't resist not serving his country. He was a patriot, a diehard patriot. He loved his country. He loved his family. So it was killing him. He had to join. So that's exactly what he did. But he was met with kind of a very difficult situation. Being a Seventh-day Adventist, he was sworn to a pact of nonviolence. But war is more violent than ever. So what could he do? He decided he wanted to become a medic. He thought he could help people instead of hurt people. So that's exactly what he set out to do. He went into the recruiting office, signed all his paperwork, passed all the physicals, and got shipped up to Fort Jackson in South Carolina. Unfortunately, Doss's dreams of working alongside patriotic men serving his country fell a little bit short. So during basic training, Doss was mercilessly teased about his beliefs, commonly being called a coward and Holy Joe because he would like to rest on the seventh day, Saturday, while all the other men had to work. And he refused to handle firearms, which rifle training is an essential part of being a combat medic. So this automatically made a lot of men resent him. I mean, like, who is this guy? He thinks he doesn't have to work on Saturday. He thinks he doesn't have to qualify with a rifle. And naturally, his NCO threatened to court-martial him. So the Army's file on Doss initially described him as a conscientious objector, which Doss disagrees with. He thought of himself as a conscientious cooperator, meaning that he wanted to fight, he wanted to serve his country, but he wasn't objecting to anything. He was cooperating. He was like, this is what I can do, and this is what I'd like to do, and I'll do it the very best I can. But the military had a problem with that. Up in the left-hand corner, I have a little picture of his unit logo, the 77th. Victory starts here. Moving on to the next page, the administrative altercation. Doss's officers grew less tolerant of his refusal to bear arms and work on Saturdays, so they convened in a meeting to have him discharged for Section 8, mental instability. So this is already extremely unfair. Mental instability because you're religious. So ridiculous. Anyway, during this time of decision, Doss was placed in a holding cell, denied all leave, and he wasn't able to see his mother, his father, his brothers, his sisters, or his wife, Dorothy. His father was finally able to get paperwork through through to the chairman of War Service Commission, who then was able to call the regimental commander, who finally agreed that Doss is protected under the Constitution and cleared him of any wrongdoing. Passed this down to the chain of command to Doss's direct supervisors, and he was released from the prison and the holding cell, and allowed to continue his training. So finally, Doss was granted a 3-day leave period, which he was able to spend with his wife Dorothy and his family before he shipped out. I have a little picture of the Judge Advocate General's logo up in the left-hand corner because he was almost court-martialed, but he wasn't. All right, now his early service. So not many people know this, but before the Battle of Okinawa, Doss had actually seen combat twice before. So I have a little picture of his graduating photo from basic camp. It's actually really hard to find this. I had to dig through some internet archives. This is actually a massive photo. I've zoomed in a bunch. So after basic training, he shipped out with the rest of the 77th to Guam, where he first saw combat. Battle of Guam, another amphibious landing. Then he did his job. He was getting used to the idea of combat. And then where he really stood out was on the next battle in the Philippines, on the island of Leyte, where he was recognized for his excellence in service. He was awarded a Bronze Star with Valor, 2 Bronze Stars with the Valor device for rescuing enemy soldiers who were wounded by intense enemy fire. So he was dodging bullets, avoiding mortars, and he managed to save these men and got 2 Bronze Stars for it. Amazing. So during these early battles, Doss really became familiar with the system, field medical tactics, and became very proficient at amphibious landings. Moving on to the Battle of Okinawa. This was the large overview in which Doss really showed his excellence. So the Battle of Okinawa was a massive, massive assault. In fact, Okinawa is a broad term. It's a Japanese prefecture for the Ryukyu Islands, which is actually 150 separate tiny little rocky islands. So the Japanese had occupied these islands since 1879. So they had a lot of time to fortify them, to build all sorts of stuff, bunkers, pillboxes, and it served as a key refueling depot for the Japanese army. So the United States wanted to cripple the Japanese army. So they launched Operation Iceberg, which is known as the Battle of Okinawa. So this was under command of Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., who was actually born in Munfordville, Kentucky, believe it or not. So joint operation between the Army, Navy, and Marines. Everyone really had to work together because this is a multi-phase battle. So it started off with a naval bombardment and then an amphibious assault. And then, of course, squad tactics to clear enemy positions. So these islands, they were extremely rocky. They had these sharp, jagged rocks that would tear through clothing and anything, really. And it made tanks really hard to get up on the surfaces. So the Japanese used this to their advantage, and they would fortify mountaintops. So these men would have to charge the tops of mountains under heavy enemy fire in order to take out the Japanese. And also, naval bombardments had little effect on Japanese positions because these bunkers were dug really deep underground, and the shells wouldn't penetrate. They wouldn't do much of anything. So moving on to Desmond Doss, where he really became excellent. Hacksaw Ridge. This was the area that is actually known as the Medea Escarpment. So it's this really tall, it's like this 400-foot tall rocky cliff. This is the picture, actually. And you can see Private First Class Doss at the top of this mountain, wearing his little helmet, propping his arm up against it. So this picture was taken because he volunteered to climb up this rocky face and hang a cargo net so men can climb up in the assault. So after a naval bombardment, the 77th charged the hill and experienced heavy losses because they were under small arms fire, machine guns, rockets, mortars, just about anything the Japanese could throw at them. But Doss, as the rest of his platoon had retreated, he decided to stay back and rescue enemies, hit his peers. So that's exactly what he did. So this is where he received his Medal of Honor because of his excellence. So what he would do, he was under heavy enemy fire. He would grab one of his comrades, drag them back to the escarpment, and then tie them onto a rope and gently lower them down. So he did this for hours, all night long. So Doss, his Medal of Honor citation says 75 men. We'll get to that a little bit later. But this wasn't the end. So Doss, on May 2nd, he ran 200 yards under heavy machine gun fire to rescue a comrade. May 4th, Doss charged through a shower of grenades to rescue 4 men who had assaulted a cave. May 21st, Doss stayed up on the ridge again. This is this ridge called Shuri, to rescue more men. So as he was dragging an artillery officer to safety, the Japanese chucked a grenade, landed beside him, and he got shrapnel in his leg. So he bandaged himself and just continued working. So as he was rescuing another man, he stood up and took a sniper's bullet in his arm. So this is really amazing. So being knocked in the face, he falls down in the mud and he grabs his arm and he takes an old rifle stock and makes a splint out of it. And then he crawls 300 yards to a medical station to receive treatment. So Desmond Doss's Medal of Honor citation. So Doss, being a very humble man, said that he only saved 50 men, but his commanding officer wanted to credit him with 100. So they eventually compromised on 75. So after his acts of bravery, Doss was declared a hero by his peers, who at the beginning hated him because of his beliefs. But he held true, and they eventually began to respect him. So unfortunately, though, Doss acquired many wounds under his service. So he was transferred to the Walter Reed Medical Center. And after numerous surgeries and losing 6 ribs, Doss was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Truman. President Truman was extremely proud to bestow the nation's highest military honor on Private First Class, then Corporal Doss. He said that, "I'm proud of you. You really deserve this, and I consider this to be a greater honor than being president." So President Truman really respected Doss. All right, life after the war. So you can see a little picture up in the left-hand corner of Doss, then out of the hospital. His arm is up in the cast because he'd taken the sniper's bullet, but he's smiling, he's positive. It's amazing. So despite his injuries, Doss only received 90% disability from the Army. And these injuries, they prevented him from doing any physical work, so he was discharged in 1946. And then, while he was in a military hospital, he contracted tuberculosis, and he actually lost 6 ribs, a lung, and 5 years of his life to this whole battle, but he ended up surviving. Unfortunately, though, he was given an overdose of antibiotics, and he lost the hearing in his ear. But he was given a cochlear implant where he was able to regain hearing, and he then got 100% disability. Doss then purchased a small farm in Alabama where he would live with his loving wife, Dorothy, and his son, Desmond Jr., until his death in 2006. As many of you know, there's a very famous movie, Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson, 2016, that depicts the events of Private First Class, Doss. So as with any Hollywood movie, there's a little bit of exaggeration that goes on, so I'd like to clear that up. So the movie claims that Doss was court-martialed. This actually never happened because it was suggested, but fortunately, this was solved through without the JAG, and Doss was made a free man. So in the movie, it shows that Private First Class Doss misses his wedding because he was kept in a holding cell. But he didn't actually miss his wedding. He was married a year before he joined the Army, so power to him. And then the movie actually doesn't show Desmond Doss being struck with a sniper's bullet and crawling these 300 yards because Mel Gibson, the director, thought that it was too unbelievable. All right, thank you for watching. I hope you've had a wonderful time enjoying the video, and I hope you have an excellent remainder of quarantine. I hope to see you back next semester, and goodbye.